So this journal entry is similar to the other one that we did in that it is fill in the blank. So if you'll just pause this video so that you can get a chance to fill it in. This is actually my husband, and he does have a recessive genetic disease called Joubert syndrome is how it's pronounced, which can affect the liver. The liver is an organ right here that helps filter out waste in your blood. It filters a little differently than your kidneys, but currently he has no symptoms, but complications can arise later in life if he gets any other sort of liver impairment, so any other sort of liver disease, and Joubert will become much more serious. So it turns out that they are doing some different types of treatments on people who have genetic liver diseases. And so what we're going to look at today is there any way to cure a genetic disease? We said no right now, but we're not sure, maybe later. So pause it, see if you can go back and fill in what these blanks are. And then after a few minutes, if you press play, then we'll go back to look at what these answers are. So if we're ready to move on, a genetic disease is a mutation in just one gene found on a chromosome, versus we talked about whole chromosome disorders like Down syndrome, Turner's, and Klinefelter's. Genetic diseases, remember, is just one section of that chromosome. This particular mutation is on the second chromosome, so it is not a sex-linked disease. So it's not on the X chromosome. So my husband is actually going to be the genotype a, because it is recessive. Genetic diseases are acquired from your mom, or you could have put dad first, and your dad, but this is from your parents. And question number 3 is really an opinion question. So you just need to make sure that you have answered whether you think we can cure a genetic disease. If you will please go to your notes now on page 69. So these are the notes on DNA fingerprinting. It turns out we can find pieces of DNA. So we can find genes by doing a DNA fingerprint. DNA fingerprints are called fingerprints because they are similar to your fingerprints on the end of your hands, just because they're unique. So a DNA fingerprint doesn't look anything like a fingerprint, and it doesn't have anything to do necessarily with the oils on your hands like a real fingerprint. What it has to do is bands or pieces of DNA. And what we use these for are lots of different things. We use them for violent crimes, we use them for paternity, we use them to compare species. So if we're trying to figure out if a polar bear is more like a brown bear or more like a panda, how would we know? Well, we can compare their DNA. We can also use it for gene therapy. So the journal entry asked if you thought we could ever cure a genetic disease. We're on our way to trying to figure that out. But we have to find the gene. So if we need to find the gene, we're going to use this source. So what happens in a DNA fingerprint, and remember you can go back and pause and rewind as you need. What happens in a DNA fingerprint is we use a tool called gel electrophoresis, and we create a DNA fingerprint. It separates pieces of DNA based on their size. So a gel electrophoresis is going to use electricity to help separate pieces of DNA. In order to make a DNA fingerprint, we have a couple of steps, and we do need to know these steps. First, a restriction enzyme cleaves or cuts the DNA. And so it's going to cut all the way through the DNA. But it cuts it at specific sequences. So here, and I don't think that you have this in your notes, but here it says GAATTC. And it cuts between the G and the AA. So this is important because since everyone's is different, except identical twins, everyone is slightly different. It's going to be cut differently. So I might not have this sequence, and my DNA might not get cut there. And so my DNA is going to be cut into different size pieces than anybody else's. So first, we're really focusing on cutting the DNA. And remember, you can pause it at any time if you need to. And then we load them into a gel. This is why it's called a gel electrophoresis. When we load them into a gel, we're going to load them along the top of the gel, and then we're going to apply electricity. So step 1 is cut, step 2 is put them into a gel, step 3 is apply electricity, and the small pieces are going to move further. Think if I'm holding a tennis ball and a bowling ball and I throw them both. Which one will go further? The tennis ball, because it's smaller. And so smaller pieces will move further down the gel. And then I just compare one fingerprint to another. Again, remember, you can pause. Here's a picture of it again. First, we add the restriction enzymes and cut the DNA into pieces. Then we put the pieces into a well, into these kind of blank boxes. Then we add the electricity, and the electricity pushes the pieces. Smaller pieces move further, and there is your DNA fingerprint. Now, when we do DNA fingerprints, we're going to come back to this genetic engineering. When we do DNA fingerprints, we're actually going to need to focus on the evidence. It's used a lot. You saw a video yesterday on crime scenes and using DNA fingerprints for crime scenes. You're now going to get a handout that is 2 different cases, the case of the bloody knife and the paternity case. So what we're going to do together right now is solve both of these cases. It is really important that you learn the technique to read this, because what does it mean? It's just a bunch of lines. What do those lines mean? Well, that's what we're going to figure out. So if you need to pause the video while we hand out that sheet, this is the same DNA fingerprint as the case of the bloody knife. When we're ready to go, I'm just going to summarize what's happening in this case. In this case, there was a famous jewel thief, Milhouse, and Smink. And Milhouse is actually going to be the victim. And so this, if you will label this case of the bloody knife, this is a crime scene. And in a crime scene, we focus on the evidence. We want to know, where did the DNA evidence come from? So, we need to know what we're looking at. Milhouse is the victim. If you'll label Milhouse victim, Smink is the suspect. And the clothes and the knife are the evidence. So we're trying to focus on the evidence and figure out where this evidence came from. So every little piece of evidence, I need to know where it came from. Did it come from the suspect? Did it come from the victim? Or did it come from somewhere else? The first band here, if I look, this DNA is on the knife, this DNA is on the clothes, this DNA is not from Smink, this DNA, it could be from Milhouse. So I'm going to check it off next to Milhouse, because it could be his. And I'm going to check it off that I found where it could have come from. Next, I have a piece of DNA that's on the knife. It's not on the clothes, it is on Smink. So that DNA could have come from Smink. So far we're saying Milhouse could have been there, Smink could have been there. The next piece of evidence is on the knife and the clothes, and it comes from Milhouse. The next 2 bands are on the knife, and they're found from Smink. So far we're finding all of our evidence. The next band is on the knife, and it's from Smink. The next band is on the knife, the clothes, and possibly from Millhouse. And the last band, knife, clothes, Millhouse. So what does this mean, all these things that we checked off? All of Millhouse's DNA was found. So we do want to put all DNA found. And this means that Millhouse could have been there. Now, if Millhouse had a band here, if his DNA looks like this, he would automatically be cleared. Because when you leave your DNA, you leave it all. That's really important to hold on to. So, that was not the case. All of Millhouse's DNA was found at the crime scene. Smink was at the crime scene. Did we find all the evidence? Yes. So right now we're thinking that Millhouse could possibly be the suspect. I'm sorry, Smink. So all of Millhouse's DNA was found. We'd expect that. He was the victim. All of Smink's DNA was found. So we're thinking that Smink could still be a suspect. If any extra DNA was found, then we would be concerned. And if Smink had any extra DNA, then we would be concerned as well. Okay. Next, if you look on the other side, this is an example of a man, Megabucks, and 3 women, X, Y, and Z. All 3 of these women are saying that they have a kid with Megabucks, that Megabucks is their baby's daddy. So what we're trying to do here is prove paternity. So if you'll label this one paternity, P-A-T-E-R-N-I-T-Y, paternity. Okay? And so what we're going to focus on is we're going to focus on the child. Focus on the child. I need to know where the child's DNA came from. Now, we know who the mom is. So the DNA, child's DNA, comes from mom and dad. So here, with X's child, this DNA needed to either come from mom or from who she said dad is. This band did not come from mom. Now, we say mom and dad give half. That doesn't mean it's half equally exactly because of the way that it gets cut up. But this band did not come from mom. It did not come from Megabucks. So X's child does not belong to Megabucks. Megabucks is not the father of this child. And I really don't need to go any further because I've already proved that Megabucks is not the dad. Next, we're going to look at Y's child. Now, I don't have to figure out where Y's DNA came from. I have to figure out where Y's child's DNA came from. This first band didn't come from Y, but it could have come from Megabucks. So I'm focusing on the child. So I'm saying, yes, I know where that DNA came from. The next band could have come from mom. The next band could have come from mom. Now, Y's child and X's child have this band in common. Does that mean that they're brother and sister? Not necessarily. We have lots of things in common with each other that are just chance. If we keep going, this band is not from mom, but it could be from Megabucks. This band, what do you think? Mom? This band? Megabucks. Next 2 bands, mom. Next band, Megabucks. So Y's child could have been Megabucks' child. And then last, we have Z's child. The first 2 bands definitely could have come from mom or from Megabucks. But these 2 bands did not come from mom and did not come from Megabucks. So this means that Z's child does not belong to Megabucks. And this is how you do a paternity case. What you're going to do is turn it over to the back. The top of this sheet is going to review how to make a DNA fingerprint. And then it's going to have you do a species comparison, a crime scene, and a paternity case.